Mighty No.9 is a game that's preceded by a very strong reputation. A failed attempt to revive the Mega Man series, absorbed by a dark cloud of controversy during its development, and then hit with heavy criticism upon release. That was back in June of 2016. It's been 9 years since then, and Mighty No.9 is now like a running joke among video game players, but for fans of Capcom's Blue Robot, it's almost like an open wound that will never close. Knowing this, a few months ago, I decided to give the game a very extensive shot. Whether it was out of interest or plain morbid curiosity, I'm not sure of. But after 25 hours of playtime and having collected all trophies, I noticed there's more to this than what meets the eye. And today, I'm here to share that with all of you. Welcome to the full picture of Mighty No.9, the first of a series of post-completion reviews brought to you by yours truly. Now I hope you got yourself a comfy seat, because I'm about to dive in. Now allow me to start by introducing you to one of the main protagonists of the story, that being Keiji Inafune. Born in Kishiwada, Japan, he is a veteran of the video game industry, known for his long and fructiferous career at Capcom. He would become one of the most highly regarded names among the company, thanks to his works on a long list of iconic video game series, like Street Fighter, Mega Man, Onimusha, Dead Rising, among many, many others. Our story, on the other hand, begins with the very end of that partnership. On the 29th of October 2010, Inafune announced through his personal blog that his 23-year-long journey with Capcom had come to an end. He was leaving in hopes of finding a way to start over, an idea that he alluded to back in 2009 at Tokyo Game Show, where he expressed concern at the state of the Japanese video game industry, saying that the West was about 5 years ahead of them. So, what was his idea to change that? Well, we only had to wait 2 months to obtain an answer. It was then that Inafune revealed his newest project, Concept, a new enterprise located at his home prefecture of Osaka, which was meant to be a new definition of a video game company. Instead of working on games directly, Concept was meant to supply other teams with ideas, artwork, and concepts for projects. It was the closest thing you can imagine to a brainstorming facility. During the next 3 years, Concept would stay mostly outside of the public eye, only participating in the development of 2 games, and one expansion for a pre-existing title. Interestingly enough, those 2 games would suffer from pretty huge development issues, with Jaiba Ninja Gaiden C receiving very negative scores upon release, while Kaio King of the Pirates would be delayed twice before its cancellation, reporting losses of around $3.8 million for the company that Concept was working with. These failures, on the other hand, did not grab too much attention. But now, we need to move forward to the last day of August 2013, the date where the company was finally given the spotlight. During the PAX event, Keiji Inafune would reveal the big project of his post-Capcom adventure, Mighty No.9, a successor to the Mega Man series. The game would be initially planned to be developed using Unreal Engine 3, and it would be released exclusively on PCs with Windows, through digital video game distribution sites like Steam and GOG. This reveal was earth-shattering, not only for taking on the challenge of trying to rival the success of a video game icon, but also because it would have to be crowdfunded to even get a chance to exist. Inafune was not alone, however, as he was teaming up with Inti Creates, a Japanese independent studio born from ex-Capcom members. This alliance had proven their finesse with their works on the Mega Man Zero series, as well as the latest 2 entries of the classic branch of the franchise. And so, the project was received with roaring positivity. But looking back now, those feelings are completely understandable. After Inafune left his workplace at Capcom, the Mega Man series was quickly drawn to a halt. Unable to find a direction for their unofficial mascot, the company chose instead to promptly shut every project down. These decisions, among other ways of unfortunate tomfoolery, like the horrendously timed Bad Box Art Mega Man making its way to Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and the sudden cancellation of projects like Mega Man Universe, allowed Mighty No.9 to really catch the attention of those fans who felt like Mega Man was being abandoned by their own creators. This sentiment was reinforced soon after, when Mega Man Legends 3 was also cancelled. The loss of the final piece of the Mega Man Ball trilogy was quite devastating for fans of the series and the franchise as a whole, not only because it was, well, another project being erased from existence, but also because this project had something very unique going on. Keiji Inafune wanted fans of the series to interact with the development of Legends 3 in a way that was never done before. Decisions like character and enemy designs, some dialogue options, easter eggs, etc. were left in the player's hands, thanks to surveys and polls that were conducted through the Dev Room website. Unfortunately, as previously said, Inafune's departure left the project without a leader, and Capcom chose to shut it down, explaining that Legends 3 did not meet the required criteria to be green-lighted. Fans would be angered further down the line when the European division of Capcom blamed them for the game's cancellation.
Y era obvio que la cancelación fue porque no había suficiente, ¿cómo se puede decir? Suficiente gente detrás del proyecto, suficientes fans. No porque los fans no existan, no. Yo conozco mucha gente que es fan de Mega Man Legends y que son fans fervientes de Mega Man Legends. No es calidad, no le falta, lo que le falta es cantidad de...
No matter the intentions, the relationship between Capcom and the fans was shattered. Thus, when Inafune showed up at PAX with what was at the time understood as the revival of Mega Man, the crowd was more than pleased. Mighty No.9's crowdfunding began live after the initial announcement at PAX 2013. Like I said, choosing Kickstarter as their platform to gather the necessary money to build the game was a pretty bold move at the time. On one hand, it was the perfect way to measure the amount of interest people had on the idea, yet at the same time, it was quite a risky decision. You see, back then, crowdfunding was not acknowledged the same way as it is today. Most of the time, it was a plan B for small developers who couldn't find a publisher. But Mighty No.9 had more to it than just the novelty of being crowdfunded. Following the modus operandi for the cancelled Mega Man Legends 3, Inafune promised to allow fans to interact with the development team for Mighty No.9, as one of the main selling points of the Kickstarter. It was like a second chance. According to the project's description, backers would be allowed to assist the team at concept and Inti creates on their creative labors through different surveys and polls. They even allowed you to work directly on the game. With big donations, you'd be able to put your voice or face in the game, or even submit your own designs. If you really think about it, this approach is reminiscent of how classic Mega Man games handled the Roadmaster designs. Back then, Capcom used to hold a contest whenever a new entry on the classic series entered production. Fans were allowed to submit ideas for bosses that would then be refined by artists at Capcom, so they could be featured in the actual game. Mighty No.9 had something similar going on, only now behind the donation incentive, and limited to just a few people. Of course, the Kickstarter was offering much more than that. In fact, the initial planning for the different tiers was quite masterful. People who couldn't afford to give $5,000 to the game were still able to participate through less expensive tiers. $5 was the entry point, and that already included access to the promised forums and surveys, as well as putting your name in the credits. However, a key aspect of this page is that it was designed to use Inafune's reputation as a professional of the industry at full power. A decent chunk of the higher tiers were related to his personality. They were going to hand out stuff like signed art books and personalized sketches by Inafune himself. Heck, the highest tier, which was locked behind a $10,000 donation, was quote-unquote dinner and drinks with the man, the myth, the legend, Keiji Inafune. They really knew what they were doing with these. The combination of these factors led Mighty No.9 to become an extremely enticing project.
Around when the Kickstarter came out, this is, I guess you can say, was like Mega Man's downfall. Like, Legends 3 was shown, now it's dead. Keiji Inafune left, and then there was maybe some other projects that kind of there, gone. And it kind of made it seem like Capcom just does not care about the Blue Bomber. And of course, if you're a big fan, you're gonna be like, oh no, that means no more games. That makes me sad.
People thought it's the end. And then he comes out with this Kickstarter and says, I'm gonna make a game, and it's not gonna be like a retro pixel game, it's gonna be a full new game, as if I were making a new Mega Man. And people were so excited.
In fact, despite asking for $900,000, a pretty big sum of money to get the project done, they got to that goal in just about 48 hours, only to go on to surpass $1 million in funds by the third day. The project would explode in popularity even further just a few days after, when Mighty No.9 was pitched to millions of people through a YouTube video. Interest in the game was so massive that the Kickstarter page, usually intended to be just a comment section, quickly became the birthplace of a passionate community.
Yo estuve ahí en el comentarios del Kickstarter. Lo convertimos en un chat. Los comentarios no están hechos ni diseñados para ser un chat. Están hechos para que tú llegas y digas, ¡ay, me gusta mucho! Gracias, felicidades y todo eso. Pero nosotros nos pusimos a chatear ahí. Había como, no sé, 50, 100 personas todo el día, todos los días, 24/7.
What is interesting about this tsunami of positivity is that you'd think that Concept's previous track record would, at least, raise some eyebrows. But that did not happen.
I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I had no idea of what they were even. I didn't even know they were a thing until said trailer came up. And if most people were like me, probably didn't even look up their history at all.
Absolutely not. People just thought this guy's been in games for like the entire time I've been alive. He must know what he's doing.
Back in the day, we didn't really know how bad it would get. And I mean, as a Fallout fan, I'm used to much worse these days. But
Unfortunately, yeah.
And unfortunately.
However, past deeds were not the only invisible aspects of the situation. While everything surrounding the project was like a dream come true, the destiny of Inafune's team was set in stone the very same day the Kickstarter page was published. This campaign had massive, fundamental issues that unfortunately were nigh impossible to notice at the time. Aside from pitching the game to the audience and explaining all of these cool interactions between backers and developers, the page showed a list of additional content ideas that the game would aim to offer in case the funding went over the goal of $900,000. This practice is not uncommon among video game crowdfunding campaigns. However, for Mighty No.9, these stretch goals held big promises. Let's think about this for a second. If the team gathered enough money to meet all of these stretch goals, the developers would have to create 2 extra levels along with their featured bosses, port the game to macOS and Linux, 2 very different operating systems, introduce a New Game Plus feature along with a Street Fighter 2-like turbo mode, a documentary, the tamest of all since it would be outsourced, and finally, porting the game to the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360, and the Wii U. We'll come back to the question marks in a moment. Now, needless to say, this is quite a ton of work on top of, making the actual game. But of course, that would only happen if they got a ton of money, right? Yet Mighty No.9 was designed to gather a ton of attention. The entire thing was designed to respond to a massive demand that was never going to be satiated otherwise. These stretch goals were as ambitious as the rest of the project, and if they happened to meet them, they would have a big bunch of work cut out for them. After the initial goal was met, it took them less than a week to smash through every single stretch goal that was initially proposed. It is at that point that Concept made the first of many big management mistakes, and that was to add even more stretch goals. With the new updated roadmap, on top of what they already had on their desks, the fellows at the office would have to add a boss rush mode, add a challenge mode, add a final level with a new boss, add an online challenge mode, and port the game to the upcoming PlayStation 4 and Xbox One on top of a few new extra question marks. I think you get the point. These stretch goals were already getting out of hand just a week into the game's development, and as numbers kept rolling in, they did not stop. By the end of the month, once the Kickstarter was over, they had raised a sum of almost $4 million, meaning they had smashed through every single stretch goal that got added after the campaign's first week, as well as everything those question marks were hiding. Mighty No.9 was going to be a much larger game than initially planned, with almost 5 times the budget. Not only that, but it was no longer a PC exclusive game, it was getting a release on everything. PCs, new-gen consoles, old-gen consoles, portables. They were aiming for the stars with this one, and so the dev team got to work. And by dev team, I mean INTERMISSION, because remember, Concept was founded as a company that supplies ideas and leadership. They are more like an advisor. However, just like the company's track record up until that time, some of these details would go unnoticed by many backers.
That's what I understand. INTERMISSION did most of it. But yeah, Concept really sold themselves as the one who were gonna make it, but they weren't a development studio, they were basically just an idea guy.
In fact, this lack of understanding was also extended to the usage of Kickstarter itself. As I explained a moment ago, Mighty No.9 was one of the first crowdfunded video games to make its way to the mainstream, and so a lot of the backers were unfamiliar with the nature of the website.
Sí vi mucha gente, sobre todo en los foros, que estaba con la idea de que es como una preventa, de que pones tu dinero antes y el juego ya cuando salga, pues ya te lo dan a ti y todo muy bien. La gente no entendía que todo Kickstarter conlleva riesgos, que no es una preventa, estás poniendo dinero, tratando de apoyar a un creador, ya sea de videojuegos, de lo que sea que te interese, ¿no?
I think I did understand, even at the time, that it was more of an investment. Like, you're pledging because you just want to see the thing be made in the first place. But I do see where people may have misunderstood that it's like pre-ordering the game, because that's the way the rewards were set up. Like, you know, back at this amount, you get the game. And back at this other amount, you get all this other stuff. So I 100% understand where that came from, because that's just the way it was presented.
On the other hand, backers were not the only inexperienced ones. INTERMISSION had teamed up with Inafune many times in the past, and they were already masters at creating 2D action platformers. Yet, Mighty No.9 was going to quickly drag them out of their comfort zone, with its 2.5D look and the interactivity with backers. These challenges were amplified by the changes that were taking place in the video game industry at the time. 2013 was the last year of proper activity for the 7th generation of consoles. At that point, only one of their successors was already out, that being Nintendo's Wii U, while PlayStation 4 and Xbox One were still a few months away from arriving at stores. A set of machinery that Mighty No.9 was now required to be released on. With no experience in developing for the upcoming, more powerful hardware, INTERMISSION found themselves at a complicated spot. The situation would be worsened not long after, with the release of Unreal Engine 4, the successor to the engine that was being employed on building Mighty No.9. This reveal happened far enough into development to prevent INTERMISSION from being able to merge their work onto this new system. With so many consoles to grasp, and stuck with developing for rapidly aging technology, communication between the two sides of this game's development would be essential for the project's success. And initially, everything looked pretty well. The Kickstarter page will receive a ton of daily updates, showcasing concept art for many of the game's characters. The game was given an initial, yet unconfirmed release date of spring 2015, and fans were apparently having a ton of input on the game's looks and development. For example, both Beck and Cole's designs were chosen through a poll among a pool of 9 different ideas from different artists. At the same time, the documentary would get its first release on September 27, 2013. This episode offers a look behind the scenes into the last weeks before the reveal of the game at Penny Arcade Expo 2013, showcasing some of the team's ambitions and worries ahead of the project's Kickstarter. But this documentary also gave some insight into some of the decisions that would shape what Mighty No.9's development would turn into as they made progress. Like the fact that there wasn't a clear idea of what the game should be like up until those last few weeks. But one thing I want you all to keep in the back of your minds is this quote from Keiji Inafune, as it will be important for later.
やっぱり昔やれなかったこととかね、やっぱりハードの限界でやれなかったことで、やっぱり自分たちが若かったっていう若さゆえにやれなかったことっていうのがあるんで、それを今回はやれるんじゃないかなっていう。
Soon after this documentary was released, all backers would receive an email containing their mighty number, which would be used for the credits, as well as a password to access backer-only forums on the official Mighty No.9 website. That was the initial idea though, but we'll get to that, just keep it in mind. These forums on the other side were engulfed by controversy from the get-go. Concept needed someone to take care of public relationships on the English-speaking side of things, and so Dina Abu Karam was appointed as the new PR manager. Unfortunately, a certain side of the community would not give her a kind welcome. As soon as she was announced as manager, some backers were quick to scrutinize Dina's previous posts on the forums, where she expressed her desire to see Mighty No.9 give importance to female characters like Cole. Her outspoken character on social topics would create concerns among some backers, who would then analyze Dina's profiles on other social media sites like Twitter and Facebook. From there, the backlash would spiral out of control. Fans would question Dina's experience with the Mega Man series, her position at Concept, and many other small details, showing concerns that her views and ideals would make their way into the game. Inadvertently, Mighty No.9 was dragged into what was essentially a preamble of the Gamergate controversy.
La manager, community manager, Dina, sí, al parecer tiene preferencias políticas sobre feminismo, lo cual se entiende, ella es una mujer de un país en el que, por lo que entiendo, hay demasiado machismo, no sé si tanto como en México, pero pues eso, era feminista y había un montón de gente a la que eso no le parecía, y por un montón quiero decir un puñado, no, realmente no tantos, y no, pues eso, trataron de hacer escándalo, pero pues Concept les dejó en claro, hey, la persona esta no va a ser directora de nada, es una empleada como cualquier otro empleado de aquí de Concept. A muchos eso les parecía suficiente, a otros no les pareció suficiente, y a los que no les pareció suficiente, pues ya sabes que a ese tipo de gente nada le va a parecer suficiente, ¿no?
The crescent discussions about these topics on the forums would prompt Mark McDonald, executive director of 8-4, to speak up on a post about the situation. He was quick to disprove many of the claims thrown at Dina, affirming that she was chosen by the Concept team, and that, obviously, she was just a PR manager. A PR manager and suddenly had to deal with a flood of messages on the forums about the topic, which led to a short but tumultuous time on the website. Thankfully though, the culprits of this whole mess would soon be found.
Nada más por ser amiga de alguien que estaba metido en lo del Gamergate, la gente en los foros que no la quería estaban en el 4chan todo el día planeando sus estrategias, su cubilma, estaban en su cubil maligno planeando las cosas que iban a hacer para tratar de fastidiar, vaya. Entonces, pues nosotros ya sabíamos. En el 4chan ponían todas las idioteces que iban a postear, y pues ya para cuando aparecía en los foros nosotros ya sabíamos de qué se trataba. Obvio, ellos estaban convencidos que Dina tenía que tener algo que ver con lo de todo esto del Gamergate, pero ninguno podía aportar la más mínima prueba fuera de que ella era amiga de la persona esta que ni me acuerdo quién era, que estaba involucrada en lo del Gamergate.
While that was quite the situation, so far it was the only stain on a project that was marching pretty well. However, like I said, the seeds for many development issues were already planted from the beginning. Along the very optimistic stretch goals, it's worth mentioning that Inti Creates was basically working on their own, while receiving updates and directions from Concept through meetings and calls. It wasn't until March of 2014, 5 months after the project was greenlighted, that the Inti Creates team traveled all the way to Osaka to pay a visit to Inafune. And mind you, this was way before we accepted remote work as a viable option, so it was going to be extra challenging for these two teams to keep each other informed. That aside, the reunion was described as very positive, with Inafune getting a chance to provide a lot of feedback on a very early build of the game. But if you look close enough, you can already see something that will ring some alarms. The game looked nothing like the concept art, and the proposed mechanic of Beck copying the abilities of enemies was nowhere to be found. Backers would also take issue with the game's Roth 2.5D look, and the many changes to basic mechanics.
Beck's ability to absorb other robots was going to be a much bigger part of the gameplay. You know how Beck, when he uses other bosses' weapons, he sort of transforms a little bit? He was going to be able to do that to normal enemies too, and it was going to be like a percentage chance on non-bosses that you get a different Beck, and it was going to give him totally unique abilities. As development went through, they phased that out. Now, development always changes things, and often features get dropped, but when it's one of the key features that people backed and you got overfunded, dropping features and not replacing them with anything is a pretty bad look.
I don't necessarily remember being impressed at the time. It definitely got blindsided by the whole 3D look and how different it looked from the initial concept artwork. But ultimately, I think even some of that early stuff still looked better than what the final game ended up being.
But at the same time, some different issues would start rising up. While Inti Creates was working hard at getting the game into a playable state, with a second alpha being shown soon after at that year's Game Developer Conference, Keiji Inafune would start taking interviews from many press outlets. During one of them, Mike Mohardy from Polygon asked him about the rumored conversations he was having with Tim Carter from Contradiction Films to produce a live-action adaptation of Mighty No.9, to which he replied that he didn't make a deal yet, but he was indeed in talks with the studio for that purpose. But more importantly, he said the following: "I'd like there to be a comic book, manga, anime, movie, TV drama series, any possibility you can think of." That's quite the quote for someone who had already seen how early the game was in development. But well, so far it was working, and they had $4 million of budget, they got the attention of the entire world, and Inafune could potentially use that to expand the IP. That perception would soon change as we zoom forward in time a few months, to July of 2014. During Anime Expo, we got two different announcements regarding Mighty No.9. First of all, Inafune presented the pilot for a TV animated series, which didn't look too promising. But then, a second crowdfunding campaign was announced. This time to raise funds for the game's voice cast, $100,000 for an English dub, separate from the Kickstarter, that any interested fellows would have to send through PayPal. That sum would soon go up to $200,000, so they could also get a Japanese dub for the game. This announcement would then force Concept to make a post on the Kickstarter page to justify the existence of this second crowdfunding, since many backers raised concerns about what the team was doing with all of that budget that they already had. So they tried to explain the following. The voice acting was meant to help the gameplay by adding conversations that be displayed as Beck progresses through levels, instead of halting the action to just display text. They also clarified that the money requirement was high because the voice acting is indeed pretty expensive. The thing is, by the time this post was out, they had only raised $20,000, so it was looking pretty dire. To solve that, Keiji Inafune came up with the idea to use the money from late backers and people who upgraded their Kickstarter pledges to make it happen. However, that meant that they would only have enough for one language, that being either Japanese or English, a decision that would be up to backers themselves, who ended up choosing English as the way to go.
Quedó extremadamente cerrada la encuesta, era casi como 49.5 contra 50.5%, una cosa así, obviamente no fue exactamente así, ¿no? Pero fue una cosa extremadamente cerrada, entonces todo el mundo de todos los que no ganaron se ofendieron.
But this second attempt at raising funds showed a very different problem that was there from the start. Mighty No.9 wasn't just a collaborative effort between Concept and Inti Creates. Among them were other companies that were going to help Inafune to complete other tasks, like the production of merchandising, the game's publishing, etc. The presence of these many alliances, on top of paying taxes, salaries, and other required expenses, would mean that Concept didn't really have $4 million to work solely on the game, like they were seemingly hoping for. This unforeseen lack of budget would create more problems down the line, but we'll get there eventually. Meanwhile, fellows at Inti Creates were progressing, but most pictures still showed the game in a pretty early state, and people's patience was being put to the test. In fact, you can already see some mixed opinions on the game's look thus far, criticizing the rough appearance of the character models, and the apparent slow progress on the game's development. Thankfully, after this bad tweak from the concept side of the project, things seemed to go back to calm for Mighty No.9. The team still had 1 year left to complete the game, and they did show quite some progress in the following updates, with Aviator stage looking much more complete now. It was also at this time that higher tier backers were able to gain access to beta builds of Mighty No.9, with the first of them giving them the chance to play through an early draft of Mighty No.5's stage. Looking at the beta footage, many of the mechanics that will remain on the final version of the game are already present, with the initial idea of copying enemies being replaced by obtaining specific types of power-ups from them. You can see some differences in sound effects and visuals, but Mighty No.9 was now visibly closer to completion. And, as a bonus, backers were given access to a small game called Mighty Gumball, an 8-bit platformer starring Beck along with other characters from Inti Creates' IPs, like Gumball and Ekoro. The issue this time was around the apparent problems that some backers had when getting the access key to the beta. There are many comments under the forum post of many backers that had issues when receiving their keys, some of them saying that the mails were automatically sent to the spam folder. Again, keep this in mind for later. Nonetheless, the beta testing would continue soon after, with Mighty No. 2's level becoming playable on the 22nd of September 2014. More updates followed, showing the remaining stages being worked on. The beta versions of Mighty No. 9 would then receive a third and last update, allowing backers to enter another stage, this time being the power plant. But then, at the end of the month, backers would be welcomed by some bad news. On the 30th of October, just before Halloween, the team posted a new update on the Kickstarter page, presenting the idea of potential DLC. What does that mean? Well, first of all, there was Ray, a new playable character with a new stage that would be DLC after the game's launch. Although, following the issues with budget, Inafune's team promised that if Slacker backers were able to raise $190,000 of funds, the DLC would be rolled out for everyone once the game was out. Obviously, people were not too happy about this, questioning the need for DLC for a game that wasn't even released yet. And this is where things would start to get really out of control for Concept. As Inti Creates was getting closer to finishing the game, a lot of people noticed that the final product would still look more or less the same as the beta builds. The thing is, the criticisms about the Roth presentation and the simplification of the initial proposed mechanics for Mighty No. 9 were never going to be addressed because, well, they were impossible to improve on. Developing for any console requires you to understand its capabilities, but also its limits. There's so much you can do with the technology given, so game developers need to keep that in mind. In Mighty No. 9's case, that was immensely amplified, since the game was going to be released on a wide variety of platforms. Knowing that, Inti Creates had to make something that would work on every system, like a template of sorts. And it's this situation that I believe to be the perfect showcase of the problems caused by the division between Inti Creates and Concept. Going back to the initial documentary episode, Inafune was looking forward to making something without thinking about the limitations that plagued the old days. And he surely did until Inti noticed it would be impossible to put the game out, or at least if its first few ideas had made it into the final game. Then, a new version of the beta was rolled out slightly before the end of the year. This was the very last time they were given access to beta testers, offering a much more complete build of Mighty No. 9. Mighty No. 1's level was now part of the stage select screen, and for the first time stuff like challenge mode was available for testing. But beyond that, it was at this point the time where backers would see a drastic change in behavior from the team itself. They would stop posting updates on the Kickstarter page, opting instead for moving to the dedicated Mighty No. 9 forums. Those news would then be compiled into a digest that would roll out once every month on the Kickstarter page. The justification for this change was to allow the team to have some rest and relaxation going to January, as the final deadline of spring 2015 was approaching and criticisms kept rising. For the next few months, both Concept and Inti Creates did take a step back when it comes to communication. Progress was still being made on the other hand, with Mighty No. 6 and Mighty No. 7's levels being showcased, followed by sneak peeks at the recording sessions for the English dub. Next month, it was the main stage, Mighty No. 4's layer, that was shown to the backers in a more completed state. But after the March digest, Concept would have to hand over some pretty bad news. On the 28th of April, the team posted the following. Okay Beckers, we've been working on something big for a while now, and finally today we can let the cat out of the bag. Concept is teaming up with publisher Deep Silver to release Mighty No. 9 this September. Indeed, the game was getting delayed. The team was aiming to use those extra months to polish up Mighty No. 9 and include a bunch of new content, like Japanese and French voice acting, text in multiple languages, and the Ray DLC that will be free for all backers since it got funded thanks to their new publisher. Their partnership with Deep Silver also meant that Mighty No. 9 was going to get a physical release. You'd think this is a very positive set of news barring the delay, but they caused quite the uproar. At that point, Deep Silver's reputation as a publisher was questionable to say the least. But beyond that, there was an underlying issue with their proposal of a physical release. The official retail copies of the game were almost half the price compared to the Kickstarter tier that backers paid for back when the game was digital only. And mind you, the backer version of these physical copies were going to have a download code, not an actual disc like the newer one. And they would still be allowed to connect to the internet, unlike the DRM-free copy of the game, the only physical option for backers back when the Kickstarter was announced. People were quick to ask if Concept was going to allow backers to upgrade their copies in some way before the release, so they could match the retail versions. And they said no. Following that set of events, at the end of May, Mighty No.9 saw its very first proper trailer, showcasing the mighty numbers, as well as some key features like co-op, weapons, and with the game looking a lot closer to completion. The somewhat nice batch of news was followed by Inafune dropping the announcement of Red Ash, another spiritual successor, this time taking the shape of the Mega Man Legends series, that would also be funded through Kickstarter just like Mighty No.9, along with an animated series just like Mighty No.9. And needless to say, knowing how things were being handled at Concept with Becky back here, people did not dig the idea of backing another project led by Inafune, especially since the first one didn't even come out yet.
The lack of communication was very bad, but of course, as I always say, the very worst thing they did was Red Ash.
It's one thing to like kind of get people going on for one thing, but if you try to stretch that out to like get the same people to donate to like your different things and your first thing isn't even done, yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know, like you already had me for this one. Why are you trying to start new things here when you're not even done with this one here?
Thus, both ports of Red Ash did not meet the necessary funds, at least initially. It wasn't until a Chinese publisher by the name of Fusei chose to back the anime's Kickstarter campaign. On the other hand, the game, which was supposed to be the main thing about Red Ash, would not get funded, thus getting suddenly cancelled. As for the animated series, we did get a small snippet of it during Anime Mirai 2017, but with barely enough budget for one episode, the show would never receive more than a single physical release for backers, and it was cancelled soon after. Back to Mighty No.9, I think this is the perfect time to say that the live-action movie was nowhere to be seen. Same with the TV series, and the release date was just a few months away. It was certainly not a good prospect. Yet Concept would later announce that Legendary Films was now in charge of making that amazing Mighty No.9 movie. And they would never say anything else about it after that. The combination of these news and the mere existence of Red Ash would cause a lot of problems for Inafune's reputation as the lead of Mighty No.9. People were rightfully concerned about him not caring about the project anymore, or him supposedly abandoning the project. The reality is that by the time Red Ash was announced, Inafune was technically done with the game.
Hubo meses en los que no había ninguna actualización del juego. Y pues, a lo dicho, entendiblemente la gente estaba molesta, desesperada, de que, hey, ¿qué está pasando con el juego? Denme alguna actualización. Pero pues la triste realidad es que el Concept no decía nada porque no había nada que decir. Lo único que quedaba era que el sacar esto del código de red. Concept hizo lo mejor que podían hacer en ese caso, la verdad. Yo entiendo la frustración de la gente, pero pues si yo fuera Concept, la verdad hubiera hecho exactamente lo mismo. No hubiera hecho decirle a la gente, miren, aquí les traemos la actualización. La actualización es que no hay nada que actualizar. El juego está exactamente donde estaba la vez pasada. Seguimos tratando de arreglar el mugroso código de red. Entonces la gente se hubiera molestado todavía más.
The next point of our timeline takes us forward to August, when backers were met with some news from the dev team. The game's release was delayed once again, this time aiming for early 2016, specifically February 9th. According to the team, this delay wasn't caused by an issue with the game content. In fact, Mighty No.9 was supposedly complete at that point. However, there were still issues regarding the online modes that needed to be solved before the game's release. They would also delay the demo that would be sent to backers due to last-minute issues, which is speculated to be caused by the very same problem. As soon as people got an explanation for the delay, criticism was quickly drawn towards Concept's decision to push the game back because of a side mode, especially since all of those backers who chose to receive the DRM-free copy could not care less about something they were not going to get access to by default. Heading into 2016, the final year of Mighty No.9's development, the future was looking quite dark for Inafune and his team. While the release date was pretty close for once, people were not happy with how the project was being managed. Neither were they pleased with Concept's sudden refusal to address their issues publicly. I think this last problem was the most egregious, since communication with the backers used to be one of the team's main priorities. But as things had turned darker, they retreated back further and further. On the 25th of January 2016, the team announced a third and supposed final delay to the game's release. This time they didn't give a specific date, just pushed the game back to spring of 2016. The culprits, once again, were the supposed network issues that plagued the online multiplayer, which, if you can recall, was one of those nice-to-have extras that was funded through the stretch goals. Interestingly enough, this wasn't the first time indie creators had drawn themselves into a corner with something like this.
This is their second go out online. Their first attempt failed. They planned a Mega Man 10 co-op mode, online co-op in fact, and the story goes there that Capcom said, alright, we're on board with this idea. Can you guys do it though? Like, do you need some help with it? Indie creators was like, nope, I got it, don't worry bud. They did got it.
Just as they had issues with the rest of the game due to their lack of experience with certain aspects of Mighty No.9, the online mode was, once again, like a final boss for the development team. Spring went by and there were no updates on the game's release date. Backers would have to wait until May of 2016 to get an actual final release date for Mighty No.9. Along with that, however, they were faced with the most unexpected, yet hilarious event of this entire rabbit hole.
Hey, you, looking at the screen. Let me ask you a question. Do you like awesome things that are awesome?
I was laughing. This is like the funniest thing ever. Like, it's kind of like that surreal. You just saw something. It's like, did I just watch what I just watched? And you watch it again. And like, no, you watch exactly what you just watched.
Probably a dash that makes you breakfast. I don't know.
Great idea. Wait, what?
That to me set the tone. Like if there was no tone set for how much of a roller coaster this whole thing was, that trailer like chiseled it onto the wall, solidified it.
You kill an enemy and you can absorb their power-ups, stuff that'll make you faster and stronger and make the bad guys cry like an anime fan on prom night. Mighty No.9.
As you already know, Concept was working along with Deep Silver to publish the game internationally. That also meant that trailers and PR management external to the Kickstarter were handled by them and not the developers themselves. Thus, on the 25th of May, to announce the final delay of the game, which backers already knew about at this point, Deep Silver uploaded a trailer called Masterclass. In retrospect, this 90 seconds video is indeed a masterclass on how not to advertise your product. The whole tone of the video is definitely not appropriate. It's designed to be a cheesy imitation of old commercials, but people who will be nostalgic about those are, well, the fans, and those have already backed your project. So, who are you trying to sell this game to? It also fails at showcasing basic gameplay features, overly focusing on the dash move, and explaining how the score system works in the most botched way possible. But the worst part of it, of course, is the infamous phrase, "make the bad guys cry like an anime fan on prom night." Yeah, never mock your own fan base, it never brings any good to you. Nowadays, this video is seen as a funny meme to look back at, but I can completely understand the ire that it caused. This trailer even forced Takuya Aizu, the lead developer at Indie Creates, to speak up on social media, and he was less than happy about it. But now, we can finally make progress to June 21st, 2016. On that day, we finally saw Mighty No.9 hit the stores. And then the reviews happened. Mighty No.9 was received by the press with a deafening silence. According to Metacritic, the average score between all reviews is, well, shockingly average. But that doesn't tell the entire story. That final score is mostly carried by a few very positive articles. Most websites and magazines seem to reach a consensus about the game being very uninspired, with mediocre level design and a pretty terrible visual presentation. The most common verdict about the game is that it failed to deliver what was promised initially, resulting in an unfulfilling product. More on that later. But the thing is, the story could have ended here, after all the jiggers that took place during the game's creative process, but it did not. Aside from the poor reception, Mighty No.9 quickly gained an even worse reputation among players. Most versions of the game were very unstable, causing huge performance issues that could lead the game or the console to crashing in some cases. Wii U players even reported that the game was able to brick the system, but this just turned out to be false, it just ran horribly.
if you've ever owned a Wii U, if your game ever crashed, you heard the very loud Mighty No.9 was quite mighty when it came to that. It wanted to let you know that it crashed, and boy did it tell you a lot of times.
But even worse, there was an issue with the game that was as baffling as it is hilarious in retrospect. Remember how the backer numbers were handed out on an email? This is where it becomes important. So you see, that number was also the way people were going to be acknowledged on the game's credits. This is common practice on crowdfunded games nowadays, but Mighty No.9's way to approach something as simple as crediting people for their help was unique to say the least. Every single person who backed the game was added to the credits proper, but with no way to specifically search out your name, the only way to find yourself was to wait for these very slow scrolling credits to get far enough down the list. And this tough roll goes on for 4 hours, only allowing you to skip to specific values. But that's not the big issue, unfortunately. If you're curious enough to watch the credits, you'll see how there are so many of these generous backers. Turns out, they do not come from anonymous donations.
After the first few votes were on Kickstarter, they wanted you to log into the thing, and they would email you from this Mighty No.9 at concept.jp instead of through Kickstarter. Like early on, everything is through Kickstarter, like update 1 through 25 are all from Kickstarter, and all of a sudden it switches from being from Mighty No.9 at concept.jp, which of course directly went to spam for a lot of people. And you know, since it wasn't updated on Kickstarter, people who didn't check their email and instead, you know, logically thought it would be updated on Kickstarter never got the survey.
So let's take a moment to sum up all we've gone through up to now. Game went through all existing forms of development hell due to planning and management issues. Backers were rightfully angry after 3 delays, and being almost tucked away from developers after things started going wrong. Game critics were unimpressed by the quality of the actual product, and some players were met with a hilariously bad performing piece of software. And then, it got even worse. Upon release, Keiji Inafune appeared live on Twitch, streaming from the official Concept USA account, and accompanied by Ben Judd, Concept's PR manager, and for this event, host and translator. The stream is no longer available on the Purple platform, so far the Wayback Machine has given me no results either, but a few bits of it have transpired, like the infamous "it's better than nothing" phrase. During the stream, both were met with some harsh comments through the chat, which led the two hosts to talk about how they were also unhappy with the results. Inafune would then affirm that he is responsible for everything wrong about Mighty No.9's development and release. But then, Ben Judd chose to add his own thoughts to what Inafune was saying. Quote,
"For now, this is what you see and what you get for the Mighty No.9 world, but again, we can hope that if things go well, there'll be sequels, because I'll tell you what, I'm not getting my 2D side-scrolling fill, and at the end of the day, even if it's not perfect, it's better than nothing. At least that's my opinion."
Many people mistook this for Inafune's words, which I can't blame them for, and it did absolutely no good to the situation. Better Than Nothing was splattered around the entire internet for a good time, making headlines even after it was clarified that it wasn't something Inafune truly said. Despite that, for many it was like rubbing salt into a wound, and looking back, it was quite possibly the last thing I'd like to hear after such a disastrous development cycle. The phrase would then go on to get memed to hell and back, worsening the reputation of the game even further, if that was even possible. It got to a point where even the official Sonic the Hedgehog account mocked them for it, which is kinda ironic considering the quality of the most recent additions to his resume back in 2016, but yeah, the entire world seemed to hate Mighty No.9. It is about this time that episode 1 of the Mighty No.9 documentary came out. This episode was recorded way back when the game was in its first phases of development, so it shows a much different picture to what would soon happen inside the office. Needless to say, for backers, listening to Inafune speak about living up to their expectations would have probably felt like a kick in the nuts. And considering the comments are disabled for this episode, I think you and I can imagine how the reaction was. Episode 1 is also the source for a common misconception about Mighty No.9's development. A lot of people seem to understand that Inafune and the Capcom veterans chose to take a step back during production and let the younger lads take the helm at the office. I might be wrong, but it seems like that quote comes from this episode, where Inafune mentions the following.
それを今やっぱり若いゲームクリエイターとも絡んでるんで、若いやつらにこう教えてあげる。何が良くって何が悪くって。
That aside, I think this episode is interesting, but it just came too late for anyone to care. It was also the very last time we saw anything about the documentary, so we can assume there was more of it. There was just no point in to keep it going. I wish they did though, so we can see what truly happened inside those offices when things went south, but I highly doubt they'd be happy to show that to us. In fact, Concept would decide to go silent, to the backers' dismay. By late 2016, the game was out on every promised console, except the Nintendo 3DS and the PlayStation Vita, which means some people who chose to receive the game for said systems were still waiting. Since the end of 2015, we knew that the portable versions of Mighty No.9 were outsourced to Engine Software, but since then, nothing was mentioned about them. To make matters worse, portable console owners weren't the only ones waiting. Most people who paid for physical rewards, like the controversial game boxes, did not get them delivered at home as expected. Fangamer, the company in charge of those backer rewards, would later reveal to the press that the rewards were not coming out because Concept did not ship them the required materials to do so. Inafune's company would keep full radio silence for 7 months after Fangamer's announcement in January of 2017. Finally, in October of that year, they confirmed that shipping of those rewards was completed, yet many of those rewards never made it to their owners. But there's more to that than what you'd think.
Hubo cosas que se entregaron primero, como la guía de estrategia, si mal no me acuerdo. Hubo cosas que se entregaron primero, sí. Pero a lo dicho, esas cosas se entregaron a todo mundo al mismo tiempo. No fue que primero unos y después otros. Hay gente que no estuvo contenta con lo que recibió, se entiende, no se le puede dar gusto a todo mundo. Es uno de los riesgos del Kickstarter. Si a alguien no le gustó lo que recibió, yo los respeto, pero se les entregó. Que no digan que no se entregó.
Unfortunately, those backers that did receive the rewards were unhappy due to the poor quality of the items. The most well-known example being the NES style box available for $80 backers. A box that was a do-it-yourself article and that was too small to house the manual that came along with it. But once again, those pieces of information don't tell the entire story.
Es cierto que el primer lote de manuales de la caja de Famicom salió, sí. Hubo ahí problema de comunicación y los manuales salieron más grandes de lo que debían, salieron de tamaño americano. Salieron de tamaño americano. Pero, y te puedo enseñar las fotos porque aquí los tengo. ¿Sí? Lo que hizo Fangamer, si mal no recuerdo, fue que reimprimieron esos manuales y les mandaron los manuales de tamaño correcto a todos esos backers.
But now we gotta bring our attention back to those unseen portable versions. Concept reassured backers that they would come out eventually, but that changed a few months after, when the company was sold to Level 5 at the end of 2017. It was at this point that journalists from Destructoid tried to contact both Deep Silver and Concept, and they came back empty-handed after being ignored by both. As you already know, the portable ports of Mighty No.9 were outsourced to a different studio, presumably after Inti Creates realized that adapting the base build of the game to those systems was completely impossible. The task to complete the ports for those two consoles would be given to the Dutch studio Engine Software. Some features were confirmed, like the presence of cross-buy and some 3D effects on the 3DS version, but no more information would surface until Destructoid contacted them directly. And, unlike Concept, they were pretty quick to reply, affirming that they were no longer working on the game. We now move forward in time to the year 2025, which is where this story ends. In January, Amazon removed the pre-orders for the 3DS version of Mighty No.9. Granted, at this point, people only kept track of these as a joke. Everyone knew that they were not coming out since the fabrication of 3DS cards was discontinued back in 2020, and the PlayStation Vita was long gone at this point. But this website was the very last place on the internet where traces of them existed, and with their removal, the story of Mighty No.9's development is over. Whew, that was quite a lot, wasn't it? I know this has been a long segment with a ton of information to digest, so let us take a small break before diving into the actual game. I wanted you to know all of this because this story is a part of what Mighty No.9 is nowadays. Almost a decade later, the Kickstarter controversy is the first piece of trivia that people mention whenever the game is brought up, and it's important that we keep documenting it for reasons I'll bring up later. Now that all of that is behind, I want to say that there's one key reason that led me to start working on this video. A while ago I made an observation about the game's press reception back in 2016. If you take a closer look, you'll notice how the highlights for many of them are, precisely, about the development fiasco. Stuff like not being able to live up to expectations, or the game being remarkable for not being a complete disaster after all it had been through. So after thinking about it for a while, I wanted to see Mighty No.9 through and through. During late 2024, I completed all achievements for the PC version of the game on stream. I'll link you to the full playlist in case you want to see it for yourself. But now, after many hours of playtime for a game that has a runtime of about an hour or two, I want to move on to the actual review part of the video. Let's take a look at Mighty No.9 as a game. Mighty No.9 takes place in a futuristic version of the United States, where huge progress on the field of robotics has allowed robots and droids to become a common sight among society. They are now mankind's best friend, helping with difficult tasks, thus making life much more comfortable. The protagonist of this story is Beck, the 9th unit of the Mighty Numbers, a team of combat robots designed for entertainment purposes by the young Professor William White. These 9 androids are very popular among the Colosseum, a facility designed to host spectacular robot fights. Think of it as this world's equivalent to wrestling. Thus, Beck and his fellows are designed to be performers, with very different personalities and powers. Interestingly enough, Beck is different in the sense that his shy nature and dislike for combat often makes things harder for the rest of the team. Whether this personality trait was an intended decision by Professor White or not, we don't know much about, but it's implied that the Mighty Numbers have the ability to learn and grow as people from their baseline personalities. One day, however, the US is suddenly struck by a robot riot. Machines of all sorts are going haywire due to a mysterious computer virus, causing havoc and damages across the entire country. Among the affected are the Mighty Numbers, which are by far the most dangerous of all. The game opens with Beck arriving at the city, now under attack by robot helpers. Soon enough, he runs into White, who asks him to make his way to the laboratory so they can be safe and trace a plan to locate and stop the other Mighty Numbers. At the same time, Gregory Graham, the president of Cherry Dynamics, the world's biggest robot supplier in the world, is on national television denying any involvement with the uprising of his machines, placing the blame on someone named Dr. Blackwell. Despite being initially hesitant to fight, Beck is able to fend off the city robots using his newfound abilities, which he shouldn't be able to use apparently, and get back to Professor White's lab without issues. There they meet up with White's companion Soichiro Sanda and his creation, Cole, who was able to keep her sanity thanks to being shut down for repairs when the virus outbreak happened. Sanda raises the idea of asking his brother, owner of Sanda Technologies, a Japanese robot manufacturer, to help them stop the robot attack. However, due to law restrictions, he is unable to send any robot to America until the outbreak is under control. With this in mind, Professor White has a plan. Beck and Cole, the only robots that can resist the virus, will be the ones to locate the Mighty Numbers and bring them back unharmed if possible. Beck is a little taken aback by this mission, but he presses on as he's the only one that can handle this task, since his power to absorb cells from other robots, on top of his resistance to the virus, are the only things that can theoretically bring back the Mighty Numbers to their senses. By doing so, White can also obtain information on the virus's code, and find a proper cure. And so, Beck pours to multiple points of the US in search of his robotic brothers, with Cole providing assistance as a navigator. While our Mighty No.9 takes care of the first of his brothers, Sanda and White discuss the implications of Dr. Blackwell being behind this attack. Sanda doesn't seem too convinced, since he was supposedly arrested a few years ago after he tried to shut down every robot in the country. As Beck makes progress on his mission, we see Graham on his office dealing with various calls about the incident. He keeps blaming Blackwell for this fiasco, but as we see him pick up the phone again, the camera pans to a file tagged as confidential, showing a logo similar to Beck's that reads, "Demonstrating innovative technology in the Battle Colosseum." At about the same time, by analyzing the traces of Excel that Beck has brought to the lab, Professor White finds small chunks of code that belong to Trinity, one of his abandoned projects. She was designed as a multifunction robot that was able to evolve and adapt by absorbing cell energy from other machines and assimilating them on her system. These traces of code leave both scientists baffled, since the Trinity project was forcibly cancelled years ago by none other than Dr. Blackwell himself, that being the reason why White left the company and joined the Sanda team. Now, once Beck has brought back all of the Mighty Numbers, the team is suddenly contacted by Graham himself, now asking for help, for the robot outrage has made its way onto the Cherry Dynamics factory. William agrees to send Beck, but he asks Graham about why is he so certain that Blackwell is behind this. He almost avoids the question, affirming that he is obviously out for revenge. Not convinced by the response, the team decides to separate for the next mission. The Mighty Numbers and White will go help Graham and stop the attack on the factory, while Sanda and Cole are sent to infiltrate the prison where Blackwell is held captive and get some answers from the man himself. They both manage to complete their mission successfully, with Sanda and Cole making their way to Blackwell's cell, and the Mighty Numbers putting a stop to the factory, with White asking Beck to leave while he confronts Graham directly. Blackwell is quick to contradict Graham's claims, affirming that he's obsessed with using Trinity to quote-unquote disrupt the weapons industry, aka he wanted to reverse engineer her code and sell her assimilation technology to the military. It turns out this isn't the first time this has happened. The truth is, the incident that took place a few years back, where Blackwell turned off all robots in the country, was done to stop Graham from activating Trinity, since her ability to assimilate components from other machines has no limit, and thus is extremely dangerous. Yet, during her last activation, she assimilated enough machines to be able to rewrite them, which means she is the cause of the uprising. At the same time, White was successful in getting Graham to spill the beans. He comically keeps shifting the blame around, but it's here that we learn that the cell absorption power that Trinity had was reworked and used to create Beck. Before leaving, however, Graham exposes White's true identity as Bill Blackwell, a name that he has abandoned and that he resents quite a bit. Back in the lab, the team manages to track Trinity's location to the Colosseum, which is now being slowly turned into a giant mess of cell. Due to the conditions, it is impossible for any robot or human to access the facility without getting absorbed by the Haywire fellow in the process. All except Beck, since he shares the same ability as her, and thus she is not allowed to assimilate him. White commands Beck to find Trinity and teach her how to use her absorption powers properly. He departs with the help of Aviator, and he is pretty quick to locate her at the very core of the Colosseum. The two clash as Trinity becomes more and more distressed, adopting different forms. After a long fight, Beck is successful in defeating Trinity, and by absorbing all of the exceeding cell energy, she is brought back to her original form, and thus the mission is over. As the credits roll, we see Professor White fixing Trinity's heart program, while Beck and the other Mighty Numbers go back to their usual duties at the Colosseum. But once the stuff roll is done, we get one last cutscene, showing Dr. White confronting his father at the jail. He explains that thanks to Beck's empathy, Trinity was able to learn from him and become a better person, so to speak. Blackwell is quick to raise concerns about the idea of robots evolving without human supervision. The game then ends on a pretty interesting question. Will Beck be a blessing or a curse for humanity? It seems like we'll never find out the answer. The story of Mighty No.9, while initially very similar to the usual structure of your classic Mega Man plot, is, in all honesty, more than serviceable for a game like this. We get the setup for this world, the main characters all have their own motivations, backstories, and personalities, and many events transpire between stages. The problem, however, is that most of the key details are not in the game itself. By only playing Mighty No.9, you get what is essentially the skeleton of the entire thing. Technically, it's reminiscent of the way games in the 80s had to tell their stories in manuals and other ways of external material. But Mighty No.9 is definitely not trying to pay homage those times, and if that was somehow the case, they did a terrible job at both conveying it and making it happen. There was a lot of time and money spent on building the story, and hiring some of the best voice actors and actresses, and the game has cutscenes from time to time, but they used those to tell the bare bones of the whole thing. Sure, you see the whole conflict happen as you play through the stages, but key points of the story, like the origin of the Mighty Numbers, White's upbringing, the clashing ideologies between him and Santa Technologies, all of that is absent from the game itself, and that is heartbreaking. I know people throw the word potential around a lot nowadays, but the plot of Mighty No.9 is truly a huge chunk of missed potential. And I want to show you that with just one example. Cole is set up to be Beck's friend and companion during his missions, but unlike Rock and Roll, who were brother and sister, Beck and Cole were designed by different people with a very different view on what robots should be. Thus, our blonde fellow here was created by Dr. Sanda, whose company thinks machines shouldn't go beyond being helpers to humans, and so she doesn't have emotions. And that personality trait makes her clash with Beck's nature, creating a very cool dynamic where the two heroes are forced to cooperate beyond their conflicting programming. Does the game show that? No. In fact, there's a moment during the prison stage where Cole directly asks Sanda about why Beck, and by extension the Mighty Numbers, are designed that way. You wanna know what he answers? And that's it. This is never brought up again. However, the biggest issue with the plot is not the writing or the characters by themselves. There's something that brings it down notoriously, and it's... It is no secret that Mighty No.9 looks very raw. That is something you can get from any of the game's trailers. But surprisingly, when in-game, models and animations are alright, especially Beck. He has a degree of squash and stretch, all of his poses are quick and snappy. Actually, most of the characters look pretty good. The issue is set around everything else. Texture quality oscillates between alright and noticeably low res, and most visual effects lack any sort of shading or lighting, making them feel like they've been somehow edited on top of the footage. The pizza explosions are definitely the most egregious example, but this also applies to stuff like burning oil, the giant turbines in the power plant, or Brandish's sword attacks, to name just a few. The game also has a few issues with properly loading textures. You can often see them at super low quality for a few seconds before they actually pop in. And to be clear, the footage you're seeing was recorded on the PC version with the highest graphics settings. Having no proper shading also brings forth a whole different issue, and that is how hard it is sometimes to distinguish some key level design elements apart from simple terrain. As a quick example, the mine level has ledges you can grab on to slowly descend down the shafts, but thanks to the bright lights and poor visual indications, it's easy to not notice them at all. And this is not just an isolated example. Visual clarity is problematic across the board. All visual effects are rendered on top of the models, as they should be, but when you start going fast, shooting stuff and dashing through enemies, more often than not, your view will be completely obscured. In any other platformer, this is pretty annoying, but since Mighty No.9 is meant to be played at a fast pace, it's more apparent. On the opposite end of the spectrum, despite these issues, I think Mighty No.9 has a lot of visual variety. Bearing the weapons factory and a chunk of the power plant, every other stage has a distinct feel to it. And opposite of how unclear the foreground graphics can be, at least the backgrounds are never intrusive to the player. In fact, they make good use of them being fully rendered in 3D by pushing them far back from the foreground. There is one stage that's a massive stinker though, that being Mighty No.2's level, the waterworks. The frozen sections are a light blue mess of tubes that mixes background objects, foreground objects, and a super shiny backdrop that makes traversal a confusing nightmare. There are other levels that struggle with layering at certain points, but none of them get as bad as this one. Yet, like I said, while these issues affect the gameplay in many ways, the most discussed problem with the game's graphics is the poor quality that permeates the cutscenes. While the models are fine by themselves, they have the most minimal ounces of animation during dialogue. Mouths are static, the number of poses they have is quite low, and dialogue boxes have a singular static portrait ripped straight from character artwork that fails to display any emotion whatsoever. This kind of presentation would be passable for a portable title, but for a game on home consoles, with almost 40 minutes of cutscenes, it's certainly not enough. The lack of any visual representation for the dialogue is made worse by the fact that you can't control text at your own pace. You can only sit through the whole thing, or skip the cutscene altogether. It is extremely sad because the graphics kinda ruin many small bits of character building. Beck is supposed to get more confident as you make progress through the game. He learns to put away his fears, and that shows through his many lines as you beat more and more stages. Yet, if you look at him on the cutscenes, you won't be seeing any of that. But the total absence of emotion is not only something your eyes can catch on, because the voice acting is not stellar either. Granted, I will only be judging the voices in English, since they are the game's default, and I am not skilled enough in Japanese or French to properly analyze the direction and quality of everyone's performance. That said, while the cast for Mighty No.9 is filled with superstar voices, and they fit every character like a glove, there is a noticeable absence of direction that fails to get the best out of these voices. There are so many lines that are almost read out loud from the script. I think the perfect example is when Professor White vents out his frustration at being unable to figure out what's causing the robots to go haywire. You can see the rare case of him showing some emotion on the cutscene, but then take a listen.
Blast! I see no pattern whatsoever. What in Tyson's name is behind this?
That awkwardness is a common occurrence across the script. But then there's the weird stuff. Sometimes the text doesn't really match up with what the characters are saying, other times mumbling is acted in such an odd way that it almost feels like an outtake.
I suppose it's the only way to contact Dr. Blackwell under the circumstances of this.
But outside of cutscenes, shockingly enough, the issues pile up even further. When it comes to sound as a whole, Mighty No.9 is sketchy. With default settings, audio mixing is all over the place. Music is usually very quiet, while voices and sound effects can create a cacophony of loud nonsense. And even when you tinker around with the volume levels yourself, more often than not, a specific sound effect will blast your ears out of nowhere. Wow, that was especially loud. I still haven't found what really causes it to happen, but it's a thing that can happen, and that nonsense is taken to another level by the in-game dialogue. Battle grunts and quotes pop up super frequently, and some of the mighty numbers interrupt themselves constantly. I think Cryo is definitely the worst offender, she just won't stay quiet. Aside from those quotes, during missions, Beck will receive information on the area's objectives through either Cole or the Scientist duo. You'll often see the current mighty number popping in there as well, which is a welcome touch. Think of it as a prelude to Star Fox's signature radio banter. Yet through that comparison, I want to show you why Mighty No.9's implementation of this idea doesn't work. Not only do these conversations pop in super frequently, but they are long. Often long enough to get interrupted by a next chunk of dialogue, or to be cut off by a screen transition. Compare that to Star Fox, which is mostly about one-liners, and you'll see a difference in no time. It also doesn't help that with how quickly you're meant to be playing Mighty No.9, you are likely not going to be paying attention to what the characters are saying. Then throw in the sound mixing issues, and soon enough the banter will turn to background noise, and it's there that it can become extremely annoying. So much so that the soundtrack is almost impossible to listen to in-game. In fact, let me get out of the way. I think Mighty No.9's music is pretty great. The combined efforts of Manami Matsumae, Ippo Yamada, Katsunori Yoshino, Masahiro Aoki, and Takashi Tateishi led to a very solid soundtrack that's upbeat as heck, while carrying enough emotion to fit the situation of every single stage. The issue is that, like I said, good luck listening to it in-game. Just as many people did, I came out of my first run without remembering a single track, except for the boss theme and the short loop of the main theme that plays on every cutscene. It wasn't until I took a listen outside of gameplay that I realized what was there, and that is a shame. I definitely advise you to do the same, take a listen to the soundtrack, it's pretty nice. Before we move on though, I guess this is the perfect time to talk about the game's performance. Because even on PC, the most stable version, things can get a little funky sometimes. While it hasn't crashed on me yet, the engine sometimes chokes when too many things are on screen, and controller inputs are quirky, with the game sometimes recognizing buttons twice. Recording for Mighty No.9 was also a little funny because it somehow makes OBS have a seizure from time to time. Of course, this is leagues away from the mess that were the old gen versions, so if you're intending to pick the game up, please do it on PC. Well then, knowing that, you can now imagine that Mighty No.9 doesn't leave a good first impression on your eyes and on your ears. But it's finally time for me to get into the real meat and potatoes of this whole ordeal. Let's get to talk about... From the get-go, Mighty No.9 takes a lot of cues from the classic Mega Man series. Its gameplay loop is all about non-linear design, with the player being allowed to tackle any of the 8 mighty numbers after the interstage is done. After bringing one of those fellows back to their senses, Beck will absorb their powers and obtain a new ability that can then be used to expose the weak point of one of the other 7 bosses. Once all 8 are defeated, the endgame section begins, leading to the last 2 levels and then the final boss. Structurally speaking, this is as close as a Mega Man game as you can get, but that's really where the comparisons end. Beck starts with a simple pellet shooter and the key element to the game's mechanics, that being the dash. You'd think this would be pretty close to how Mega Man X handles the same move, but from the get-go you have so much more mobility. Beck can dash on the ground, mid-air, straight down, and close to the ground like a slide. Despite all of these options, it's very simple to understand, and since you can cancel out of it by just letting go of the button, it's easy to keep yourself under control. The dash has a second purpose, however, and that is to absorb cells from enemies. Once their health hits 0, foes will start flashing in a specific color, giving you the visual cue to dash through them and get a hold of their powers. Depending on the color, Beck will gain a boost in attack power, speed, or firing rate, while the blue ones slowly charge your ability to restore your health. Although, from the moment an enemy is put into their glowy state, their cells will slowly lose power, so you're incentivized to absorb them as quickly as possible. Put all of these mechanics together and Mighty No.9 has the framework for a platformer that works very differently compared to Mega Man. The intended optimal way to play the game forces players to approach enemies in a unique manner. You're meant to judge your distance to the enemies, gun them down as you get closer, and then dash at them from point blank. On paper, this is an extremely unique way to formulate a gameplay loop. In practice, well, we'll be there in a second. There is one last move that is never explained to you directly, which is what I call the back jump. By holding the right trigger and then shooting, Beck will leap in the opposite direction while shooting downwards. It's unfortunate that this move is only shown to you on the tips menu, because it can be useful in various situations. It even allows you to quickly dash out of it, to compensate for its slower startup, during which you have a decent amount of iframes. It's really not a bad tool at all. Everything else is properly taught to you through the intro stage, which, to be honest, does a decent job at showing players how to approach the various situations that every other level will put them into. This introductory level has enemies that are placed in progressively more challenging situations, forcing you to get creative to absorb them. Along the way, you will learn how to use basic elements like ladders, ledges, and low-hanging ceilings. Same goes for common gimmicks like enemy gauntlets. The only part I take issue with is how early the game throws you into instant death hazards. But that aside, it's a solid introduction to Mighty No.9. As for the boss itself, it's here to teach you how the main mechanics morph during big fights. You'll need to absorb cells multiple times to properly damage the mighty numbers and other machines. So just as you're required to measure distances for normal fodder, you need to know when bosses will become vulnerable to quickly approach them and sap away their powers. Ground Digger is perfect for that, because most of his attacks have a safe spot right next to his weak point. Once you're done with this guy, you'll be thrown into the stage select screen, and from there you're free to roam the game at your own leisure. At this point, Mighty No.9 has shown some very competent game design, and if you missed something, there's the aforementioned tips section to help you out. But unfortunately, it's when you go beyond the introductions that the cracks start to show up. To begin with, I feel like the basic gameplay loop is never explored beyond the stuff that's present on the intro stage. Sure, enemy placements and gauntlets will get more involved, but that's it. Aside from what each enemy type asks you to do, there's not much to how the game sets up your opponents. In fact, most attempts at amping up the challenge end up hampering the experience. For example, the game will often want you to be fast enough to carry a power boost through a section with very tanky enemies on a line. That is because Beck's Buster pierces opponents when he's beefed up with wreck cells, and that's fine, but then you get to situations like this portion of the military base, whereas you're meant to be quick, the game suddenly puts a ton of these guys in line, popping out of a place where they are hard to notice, close to the border of the screen. Your punishment for failing to notice these hard to see tails is to get bonked into instant death spikes. And this is the big struggle that Mighty No.9's design never manages to circumvent. It also doesn't help that enemy types are very restricted. Most foes are shared between levels, and when they're not, their functions mirror those from opponents you've already seen elsewhere. And that is often the reason as to why the levels feel very samey, despite them being visually recognizable. If every stage uses similar enemies, and the only way to spice things up is to throw around some hazards that kills you in one hit, it's easy for the player to lose interest. This aspect is made even more apparent when you realize that there aren't really too many unique set pieces in Mighty No.9. Most stages share elements, or at least they do conceptually. Both the oil refinery and the mine have instant death hazards that will kill you if you don't run away quickly enough. Both the radio tower and the power plant have almost identical sections with the same enemies, only one is suspended over a pit, and the other one has an instant death turbine below. Both the mine and the oil refinery, again, have a similar section with moving platforms and ledges placed around instant death spikes. I could keep going, but I think you get the point. In fact, Mighty No.9 is often described to be a very hard, almost unfair game because of the common usage of these elements. And to be honest, they are onto something. This game has some issues when laying out its difficulty. For most of the game, once you get the hang of the main mechanics, everything is manageable even if you haven't played a Mega Man game in the past. But then, there are specific moments where the difficulty curve gets a massive spike out of nowhere. It is true that not all of the main stages are equally hard, and that is part of the system, but the ones that are designed to be harder are only so because of the many cheap shots you can run into on a blind playthrough. In some cases, I struggle to believe that some of these levels are meant to be that hard. As a quick example, the mine starts off with a few sections where you need to slowly make your way down to the shafts, by using the ledges to see something up ahead. But because this idea is not properly communicated to the player, it is likely that you'll just drop down and fall straight into a pit of spikes that you didn't know was there. Another example, the oil refinery has a section where massive oil drums will start falling into the foreground. Getting hit by these means an instant death, and this one is almost guaranteed to catch new players on their first go. Not only does the pillar fall super quickly, giving you almost no time to react, but the dialogue box of Dr. Sanda screaming at you to be careful is not properly timed to the gameplay, so it's often too late when it actually comes up. And then, there's the spike pit at the waterworks. These kinds of challenges are common for classic Mega Man games, but there is a key difference between those and Mighty No.9's, that being the lack of a screen transition. While that used to be a technical limitation, players had a chance to react to what was coming up as the screen scrolled vertically. When you take that out of the equation, it becomes much more exigent, and borderline unfair. The overuse of instant death hazards not only hurts the balance of difficulty across the 8 levels, but it's only made worse by the bizarre design decision to make those obstacles pierce through your invincibility frames, meaning that any form of knockback can also end your run out of nowhere. Needless to say, with these design choices, levels can become frustrating very quickly. Actually, about the spike thingy, this is infamously a problem with the very first Mega Man game, and considering Inafune himself died to spikes this way in one of his test sessions, I do wonder why he never bothered to ask for a change. Now, oddly enough, Mighty No.9 has a difficulty selector, but it only allows you to crank up the challenge even further, which means you're gonna have to play with instant deaths and limited lives, and you're gonna have to like it. Though at the same time, the game often feels like it has to be this limited and simple because of the multi-platform issue. They had to make this game work on every system, and it feels like the solution they landed on is just use the same idea in various forms, and then add difficulty by planting multiple iterations of a singular piece of code. That isn't to say that there aren't unique ideas in the game. The Capitol building is built around chasing countershade through various corridors. The highway combines short auto-scrollers with precision platforming, and the radio tower has rushes of wind that interact with Beckers' physics in different ways. On the contrary, some of these unique mechanics are somehow broken. The vertical wind allows you to infinitely rise by mashing the dash, which is enough to completely ignore this section. The same thing happens to the underwater chunks of Cryos' stage, only in this case it's even easier to exploit. When all of these factors are combined, you get a gameplay loop that's unique and fun, but that's also never properly developed enough across the main levels. With all of these flaws, you'd be right to think that there's nothing to enjoy about these stages. Nonetheless, among all of this negativity, there's one more mechanic that Mighty No.9 really pushes you to use, and that puts things into a very different light, and that mechanic is the score system. Like I mentioned, the game wants you to be fast and precise to maximize the rewards you get from enemies. At the same time though, it's trying to push you into learning how the score system works. Mighty No.9 gives you more points for defeating enemies with a perfect absorption rate. Doing so also kickstarts your combo meter, which vastly increases the amount of points you get. As you rack up perfect dashes, that multiplier will keep growing even further. And at the same time, there are other ways to increase your score. For example, dashing through various enemies mid-air also gives you a multiplier boost, and by clearing certain sections within a specific time limit, you can get special bonuses like quick clear or nice clear. Same goes for the fine play bonus, which is awarded by performing certain actions during boss fights. I have to say, these rewards are easy to accidentally trigger if you're curious and skilled enough, and it's quite satisfying to get them to appear. At the end of each level, you'll be ranked for your performance, with rank S being the maximum you can achieve. While Mighty No.9 is extremely flawed on almost every aspect, it's through these systems that the game achieves the arcade-like feeling that was promised initially, but it's also through these lenses that the level design kinda starts making more sense. All of those enemies placed on a line are there to allow players to get score boosts, and since most elements behave in a very consistent way, perfect runs rely entirely on skill. Speaking from my experience, it's true that Mighty No.9 becomes super entertaining once you start to push yourself into getting better times and higher ranks, but this design choice is a double-edged sword. Of course, not every player enjoys these kinds of challenges, and by looking at how punishing and bland the game feels if you play it more casually, it's totally understandable if you don't want to keep playing beyond your first run. And that is what I believe to be Mighty No.9's most fundamental flaw. It's designed in a very narrow-minded way, which means if you don't vibe with it, your enjoyment of the game is likely to dip down into the abyss. Okay, now, I think that's all I had to say about the main levels and mechanics. Let's get onto the mighty fellows now, shall we? In the same way Robot Masters used to be a big part of every Mega Man game, the mighty numbers are as important to Mighty No.9. Beyond their designs, which I believe to be pretty cool across the board, they are a big part of the game's identity, and that is because unlike Robot Masters, they have a lot more presence. Every stage gives you multiple encounters with the respective mighty number, before you eventually corner them and force them into a fight. And like I mentioned a while ago, they're also pretty chatty and won't hesitate to make their way onto the line of communications, and I think this is pretty great. You get a chance to see these guys before the actual boss fight. Sometimes the game even gives you a chance to see a few of their attacks before the end of the level. But how about the boss fights themselves, you might ask? Well, for starters, their attack patterns are quite complex, demanding observation and quick reflexes. Thankfully, most of them telegraph their attacks quite well, both visually and audibly, so it's all a matter of paying attention and knowing how to respond to each of their moves. Also, unlike their stages, each fight is drastically different, sporting custom arenas for each mighty number. For example, you fight Countershade at an office that he uses to his advantage to shoot you from unexpected angles, while Pyro, on the other hand, is fought in a blazing area where walls are dangerous, complementing his suffocating moveset. The issue with these fights is that some of them carry over the same mentality as the levels themselves. Their design follows the Mega Man formula of having bosses with varying degrees of difficulty, but here it's done the Mighty No.9 way, and by that I mean that the bosses that are supposed to be harder all have an instant death attack. It feels super punishing, and even if the game gives you some power-ups upon retrying a battle, it's not an excuse in my opinion. I would be fine with bosses having an instant death move if they weren't so unexpected and hard to avoid. I think the worst offender is definitely Pyrogen, Mighty No.1. If you take contact damage from him, he will grab you and instantly kill you. Considering he's a brawler, it means that almost every single one of his moves can potentially end back instantly if you happen to miscalculate just one of his patterns. It's also a truly counterintuitive move, since, just like every other boss, you need to dash into him every once in a while, putting yourself at risk constantly. In fact, some of these fights don't work too well with the absorb mechanic in mind. The other melee boss, Brandish, is also hard to hit with the dash move, since he's constantly spinning around, and the game clearly wants you to absorb his cells when he's trying to attack you, dubbing that as a fine play, but doing so feels super inconsistent. Despite those issues, I think the boss fights are mostly pretty nice and can be mastered with enough patience and skill. And speaking of skills, let's talk about the rig selection mechanic, which I've been holding on to tell you about up until now. Why? Well, because they leave a lot to be desired. After every fight, Beck will obtain a new transformation that you can freely change into at any time. These grant you special weapons that are limited by ammo in exchange for being far stronger than your basic pellet shooter. You can also replenish that ammo by either waiting patiently or by absorbing enemy cells, which ties these weapons to the gameplay loop pretty well. The issue is that most of these resurrection weapons are not great. Seismic Form is overshadowed by the more reliable melee moves of Brandish Form, Pyro's Fire Blast takes a lot of time to charge up, and while Counter Shade's ricocheting shots are very strong, the game rarely gives you a place where it's worth your time to use it. And I say worth your time because swapping between forms is not as comfortable as you might expect. By pressing the left bumper or the left trigger, you open up the small menu, highlight the form you want to turn into, and then press the top face button to activate said form. Granted, the game does give you the ability to set a max of 3 forms to a specific balance of the controller, but if you wanna use anything else, you gotta go the long way around. Doing all of that while you're speeding through a level is sometimes a little too much, so the thing I often resort to is to just stick to one form. And that form is usually Battalion. His explosive missiles have a huge AoE effect that hits like a truck, spends almost no ammo, and is effective against mostly everything. It overshadows every other reselection in power and utility, except maybe Brandish, Metal Blade style, relegating every other form to just be a thing you equip for one boss, and that's it. Speaking of which, Mighty No.9 has a weakness order, but the game doesn't let you experiment too much. Not only is every boss weak to just a single option, but the game spoils what each boss is weak to on the stage select screen. If a stage has an advise button, it means it's the right choice, which is a huge bummer. On the other hand, having the mighty numbers you already saved help you throughout the stages in some way is super cool, and I wish future Mega Man games do something like this. Even if a few stages don't really change, it's just nice to see them pop up. That said, once you're done with the mighty numbers, the game opens up 2 more levels that you can freely choose from, kickstarting the endgame of Mighty No.9. These 2 endgame levels are usually where most people stop playing, and I'm gonna do my best to identify why that happens. On one hand, the factory is the coolest level in the game. If you ask me, it's set up to be a knowledge test, forcing the player into using all of Beckers' transformations in various ways. You'll be cooperating with all of the mighty numbers to stop the manufacturing of infected robots. And so, the level really feels like it's the climax of the adventure. The boss fight against Mom at the end is fine, nothing special, but the journey to get there is very fun. On the other hand, the prison is the worst level in the game by a long shot. This is the Call exclusive stage that was shown in the Kickstarter, and so it plays nothing like the rest of the game. Call has a much more limited moveset, and of course she can absorb cells, so the level is focused on stealth and solving puzzles. That is, until you get to the halfway point, where you'll be thrown into an enemy gauntlet. Since Cole's weapon is low, weak, and only allows you to have 1 bullet on screen, you'd think this section will be all about dodging and waiting for enemies to eventually leave. But no, the game throws conventional enemies at you, which you can't absorb, so you're forced into blasting them with your super weak weapon until they are defeated. The result is a very drawn out gauntlet that feels like it wasn't designed to be played this way. This section is followed by the most hilariously difficult spike pit you'll ever see, requiring the precision of a surgeon to make it through unscathed. The boss fight that awaits you at the end isn't that bad, but just like the enemy gauntlet, it's a little too slow and boring. And if you happen to die or game over, which is likely on your first go after surviving that spike pit, you have to do it all over again as usual. That is how the prison becomes a roadblock for most players. It's long, boring, and very frustrating. Issues that are accentuated by forcing players into accustoming to a new character right before the grand finale. The idea of playing as Cole is not really that bad, but if this level was located sooner on the game structure and it was a little less exigent, it would have been much better. But once you've cleared both, the real last level opens up, that being the Colosseum. This was also a stretch goal and it shows, since it feels a little tacked on to the game. It's shorter and easier than the last 2, and it relies a lot on enemy gauntlets and autoscrollers to extend its length. The key feature of this final stage are the cell blocks that transform into platforms when being shot, which makes for some fun puzzles, but the game doesn't properly convey that getting too far away from the blocks immediately resets them, so it can become confusing for out of players. That said, once you're through them, you'll reach Trinity, the final boss. It's a challenging one, but I feel like it's not very interesting. Phase 1 is very reminiscent of the Yellow Devil, forcing you to dodging small projectiles until the weak spot is open, while Phase 2 is centered around damaging Trinity's spots to absorb them and make her head vulnerable. It's not a bad fight at all, bearing some cheap shots, but since the stakes are not as high as the factory level, it feels underwhelming. But alas, once Trinity is defeated, Mighty No.9 is over. But the thing is, if you only play the main game, you'll walk out of it thinking it's just a flawed game with some very frustrating elements. The problem is, there's much more to dig into here than what meets the eye. As promised, Mighty No.9 includes various additional modes, like challenges and online co-op. Up until this point, you could tell that the game was a little rushed in some aspects, with levels, bosses and mechanics feeling somewhat undercooked. Yet the moment you step into any of these extra modes, you'll find nothing but cracks in the Mighty No.9 wall. Let me begin with Challenge Mode. It's composed of 36 special challenges that are meant to push you into using your weapons and abilities in odd ways, which should help you to realize some of their potential on the main adventure. The problem is, that's just merely an intention and not what's really in here. Challenges 1, 2, 3 and 5 are basic tutorials for Beckers' physics, removing your dash to force you into adapting to his basic running speed and jump arc, with the last one showcasing the combo system. Challenges 4 and 6 through 14 are all a copy-pasted level with targets you need to destroy using a single one of your transformations. And challenges 15 to 23 are custom stages also meant to test your knowledge of every selection. But then, challenges from 24 to the last one are just the main levels. You're meant to clear every single stage on normal difficulty without dying, with challenge 36 being a full deathless run of the entire journey. Needless to say, these challenges are either rehashed content from the main adventure, or basic challenges that are copied and pasted across the board. It's a mode that hides some interesting set pieces, but it overall feels extremely rushed and unfinished. The other single player EX mode, Boss Rush, puts all bosses one after the other on hyper difficulty, and only gives you 2 healing power-ups for the entire duration of it. These ones are very hard, but there's nothing really wrong about it. Unlike the online co-op mode, which almost feels like an afterthought, Inti Creates definitely struggled for months, almost a full year, to try and get this thing to work, and unfortunately they did not succeed. Even with a wired optic fiber connection, it's almost unplayable. And I say so because getting into a match is nigh impossible. On one note, I'm surprised the servers are still on after so many years, but this game wasn't meant for 2 players, nor was it meant to be played online, so there's no reason to go back to this, unless you're making the video of your life like me. Last, there's Race's Stage, which was, if you recall, a DLC that was announced before the game's release, but was included for backers from the get-go. You can enter her stage as soon as you gain access to the level select, and well, it's pretty interesting. For once we get unique enemy types, and you fight Ray multiple times as she gets more and more powerful. Winning that fight unlocks her as a playable character. Compared to Beck, Ray is almost like his antithesis. Her main gimmick is that she is slowly dying, so you need to keep absorbing cells in order to prevent your health from ticking down to 0. Unlike Beck, her dash will damage enemies, so you're encouraged to go crazy. And to compensate for it, the Vermilion Destroyer is pretty fragile, so there's enough rest to keep the gameplay interesting. She also gets different abilities with her reselections, but that's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gives her unique tools that perfectly tie in with her main mechanics. In fact, most of them are far more useful than Beck's transformations, but on the other hand, good luck getting at least one of them because boss fights almost require them now. Her basic attacks deal almost no damage to the mighty numbers, which makes your first selection an uphill battle, and since her weapons are different, using them as weaknesses can feel awkward, especially against those bosses that have a quirky weak point. And then there's the fact that many of the main levels are not designed around Ray. Don't get me wrong, she's extremely fun to play as, but despite some of the changes they did, like adding enemies so you don't die at certain points, some set pieces are still not designed for a melee character like her. Every instance where there's an explosive barrel, it's super annoying. Now, in terms of story, she gets small cutscenes from time to time, but that's mostly it. But just make sure to only play it after you're beating the main story, since the level of challenge here is far greater. And with that, I think I went through everything there is about this one game. It's about time we start wrapping this up. And now, before we go, I want to respond to a very interesting question. It is often mentioned that Mighty No.9 failed to live up to what it was promised to be, but as you've seen, that doesn't seem to be exactly the case. Thus, I present you with a chart of promises. we're going to have a quick look at every stretch goal and feature that was presented throughout the development of Mighty No.9, and I'll be ranking them with a self-explanatory yep or nope, depending on their presence on the product, or a somewhat if they got modified or made in a half-baked way. So let's get to it. 2 additional stages, yep, that's in the game, easy enough. Mac and Linux versions, yep, those came out. A little later than the Windows one, but they did. New Game Plus and Turbo mode. This is our first somewhat, because while we have Hyper mode, a difficulty setting that gives you every reselection from the start, Turbo mode never made it into the game. Making of documentary. Another somewhat. They did release 2 videos of the documentary with the promise of more, but since these barely go in depth and they were cut a little too short after development went south, I don't think it's as complete as it should be. Boss Rush mode. Yep, that's in the game. Same for the next one, PS3, Xbox 360 and Wii U ports. Challenge mode is there. I'm tempted to give it a somewhat because of how shallow it is, but I'll be fair and just drop a yep. Extra end stage and boss. Yep, that's in the game as well, with the Colosseum and Trinity being the last hurdle before reaching the credits. Beck and Cole online co-op mode. This is getting a somewhat. It's there, but it's barely playable, so I can't outright say they delivered on this one. Interstage and boss. Obviously, that's a yep. Support character. Yep, that's in the game. Patch was designed along with Beckers as promised, and he's there to give you power-ups on every stage. PS4 and Xbox One versions. That is also something they delivered on. PlayStation Vita and 3DS versions, our first nope so far. These 2 were never released as we already discussed, so nothing else to add here. Single player call stage and boss fight. Yep, it's frustrating as heck, but that level is in the game. Optional retro style OST. Another yep, you can toggle this on or off at the options menu. And finally, we have online race battle mode, which is getting a somewhat. The mode is there, but it's on the edge of being completely unplayable, so they didn't completely fulfill their promises here. Outside of stretch goals, we did get Rey and her stage, so that's our final yep. As you can see, in the end, they did complete almost everything on that massive chart. Sure, some aspects of these goals are not ideal, hence the somewhats, but the only things that were never realized were those portable versions of the game, so technically, concept identity creates weren't as faulty here as some people believe. Now, dropping certain ports isn't uncommon with these kinds of projects either, but the issue with Mighty No.9 is how the developers did not allow backers to modify their survey responses. As a quick comparison, Hollow Knight was meant to be released on the Wii U, but since that console was outdated by the time the game came out, people who had asked for those were given a Switch copy instead. Mighty No.9 never did this, so those who wanted the portable versions ended up having to buy the game separately. That is a massive sin, completely inexcusable, but outside of those 2 ports, they did complete way more goals than what you'd assume thanks to the game's reputation. And to wrap up this section, I was super curious about those dinners with Keiji Inafune, which a sum of 4 people paid for back in the day. The truth is, we have small pieces of information pointing at them actually happening, but those are not 100% clear.
No encontré evidencia alguna de lo que te estaba diciendo la vez pasada, de que me consta que hubo 2 y que al menos una de ellas la anunciaron en los foros. Estuve buscando izquierda, derecha y por todos lados y no encontré evidencia pública de que hayan ocurrido. Seguido preguntaban por las cenas estas, qué pasó, quién estuvo, etcétera, etcétera. Y al menos en estos 2 posts, tanto Dina como Nick por separado, respondiendo a preguntas distintas, están diciendo que no pueden hacerlos públicos porque son cuestiones privadas, etcétera, etcétera, que al menos que los backers quieran. No pueden decir nada de las cenas esas. Y otra cosa, hay otro post que hice yo en los foros. Hola. Preguntando, hey, los fulanos estos de las cenas, cuéntenos qué pasó, díganos de qué nos perdimos, vaya. Sí. Y me acuerdo que ese post lo hice en respuesta a una plática que tuve con Nick, que me dijo, oye, y por eso me acuerdo de que había 2 backers que faltaban, porque a lo mejor no es cierto que eran 2, a lo mejor eran los 4, no sé, pero en una de esas yo estuve platicando con Nick Y me dijo, oye, estamos buscando a los backers por todos lados y no nos responden los correos, no nos contestan los mensajes en el Kickstarter, no hallamos cómo comunicarlos, si me puedes ayudar de cualquier manera que me puedas ayudar, o una cosa así. Y dije, algo así pasó, que a raíz de eso fue que hice el post ese en los foros preguntando, oigan, ¿dónde están?
Since those people are unlikely to ever speak up about it, and I certainly haven't been able to find them, I don't think we can confirm them, but at least I'm happy to have walked a few steps closer than I was at the start of this investigation. But alas, we've reached the end. Time to send this video off. After its disastrous development cycle, Mighty No.9 will be released into a world that was ready to hate it. Backers were angry, critics were disappointed, and the masses were laughing. Knowing this, it should be no surprise that Inafune's grand project was not a success. We don't know the exact numbers, but it is clear that the game sold very poorly beyond the copies that were sent to backers. Thus, what truly transpired about this whole situation wasn't the game's quality or its shortcomings. No, it was the Kickstarter disaster class, and to this day it's still what many people know Mighty No.9 for. But as you have seen throughout this video, there is more to it than just the controversy. Beyond the poor planning and subpar execution of its many aspects, hides a game that was aiming to be something very unique. Yet it ended up transforming into a messy experience, a death by 1,000 cuts. Knowing this, and after my critiques, I think it's finally time for me to formulate the final question. Do I recommend this game? It might be surprising, but yes, the answer is yes. So allow me to explain. Just like how I came into playing Mighty No.9 out of curiosity and realized that there was a lot more to it, I think there's a lot of people that deserve to see that for themselves. Because let's be honest, playing this game upon release was a sour experience for everybody. And that is completely valid.
Yeah, I know for a fact though that this 100% changed people's opinions of him, and it kind of you ever heard the phrase "never meet your heroes" or "never idolize your heroes," and I feel like this is some people's awakenings of yeah, don't ever do that. I mean, I wasn't super idolized of the guy, but I definitely the illusion was shattered for me. It was oh, I guess he wasn't as good as we thought he was.
Yet it's been almost 10 years since then, and to my surprise, many of the backers who didn't play the game after it came out still haven't done so.
Yeah, my response was essentially yeah, it was a mid game, was it worth the wait? Probably not, but it definitely it exists, and it's out, and it's technically not a scam, and that is already worthy of a goddamn price given the circumstances.
Of course, to clarify, Mighty No.9 is not a misunderstood masterpiece by any chance. This game is flawed, but it still has positives that are often overlooked. And it's likely that reliving the game, now without those feelings on the back of your mind, will show you a very different picture. Thus, I would recommend you to go back and give it a shot, even if you already played it before. It's also often dirt cheap on Steam, so you won't have to scare your wallet too much. But yeah, please play it. Maybe you'll find something new to like, or maybe you will get more reasons to never come back again. That is up to you. But what makes Mighty No.9 truly noteworthy for me is that despite its failures, it was extremely successful in one aspect. It showed that video games could be more than just a product. Inafune's project was a reunion, a response to all of those passionate fans that wanted Mega Man back. And for a while, that sense of collaboration brought joy to so many people. Of course, those feelings would eventually turn sour, but it's impossible to deny that Mighty No.9 was something truly special. Inafune and their team carried all of those hopes and expectations, and unfortunately, their hands slipped and sent them crashing into the ground. Yet those mistakes would soon become the source of many teachings for future projects. Many developers were now aware that crowdfunding a game was a valid option, and had a much better picture of how you should approach a project like this. And since then, we've seen the results. We saw the rise of many games that would revive those feelings again. Some are now icons of the industry. but for them to get it right, someone had to get it wrong. That is why Mighty No.9 was indeed a failure, but it was not a mistake. We slightly went over this before, but what did you think about Mighty No.9 like in 2025?
Feel like it could have been a very good game if the management was better, because it's like BoJack Horseman said about the show Beckers. It had all the pieces, but it couldn't make them fit.
And so, if it had come out 1 or 2 years earlier, I would have been like, oh yeah, this is a really fun game, and I would probably play it more. But it didn't. It came out when it did, and then, therefore, it sort of moved into this sphere of like, it's a fine enough game, but fine enough isn't good enough anymore. And like I said, it's fine. It's just, fine is not good enough in today's landscape.
I haven't gone back to it since, but I did enjoy it. I actually did have fun. I liked the concept of like speedrunning. So I liked it. It definitely had the spirit of Mega Man in some way. There's going to be a lot of things that might just make you want to stop playing the game, and I wouldn't blame you. I have a hard time recommending this game to people, but I do think it's a pretty average good game.
It definitely had the Mega Man 1 syndrome. Rough around the edges, the first game syndrome. Rough around the edges, all the ideas aren't 100% set in stone yet. They're still figuring things out. But you felt the potential that if they ever did a Mighty No.9 2, that all those rough edges would be smoothed over and they'd really figure out the formula that they want to go with.
Para mí, como te comentaba al principio, para mí este juego ha sido una de las cosas más interesantes que he hecho en mi vida. Que se logró, no se logró. Hay cosas que no se pueden hacer, no se pueden lograr. Lo único que me pesa es que no haya vendido las 50 millones de copias que yo esperaba que vendiera. Pero toda la pasión, la dedicación de otras personas, no nada más de mí, que pusimos en los foros, en los comentarios del Kickstarter, la gente que conocí, otro de los moderadores, Joseph Barón, sigue siendo uno de mis mejores amigos en la vida. Entonces, para mí, todo lo relacionado con este proyecto, pues yo prefiero ver las cosas positivas, la parte positiva de este proyecto.
If you made it to this small final chunk of the video, first of all, thank you. This project has been the biggest, most expensive thing I've ever done in my life. It's taken almost a year to be fully realized, so I hope you could enjoy the results. And before anything else, I also want to thank all of the wonderful people that have contributed to this video. Being able to have a chat with you opened the gates for so much information I would have never been able to obtain otherwise. I also want to give a shout out to Yosomi for being there back when we streamed this game to completion, and for supporting me through the making of this big ass video. You all made this possible, and I'm very grateful for that. If you got this far, I hope I convinced you to stay for future videos, or at least, I hope you came out of watching this with some new knowledge about Mighty No.9. My name is BurnCrowSP, and thanks for watching.